Are European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese different languages? The answer is in the fact that they are both called Portuguese. No, they aren't. They are the same language evolved according to slightly different rules over a couple of centuries. But sometimes, too many times, they are in fact treated like two different languages. This is just my opinion about a matter that can be sensitive. I try to stay informed, but you shouldn't see any of this as fact. So if you disagree, please refrain from stoning me. Most people, both in Portugal and Brazil, will reject the notion that a Brazilian language exists. However, the same people will too often regard the variant of Portuguese they speak as the correct one. In Portugal, for example, many people tend to pick up a text written by a Brazilian author and consider it to be written not in their native language but in some bastardization. In Brazil, things are even worse, with a large number of Brazilians complaining that they can't understand Portuguese people speaking, to the point that Portuguese actors working in Brazil have to speak with a Brazilian accent. And what are the differences that cause all these communication difficulties among speakers of the same language? Well, a few words are written with a letter added or subtracted. Some things have different names. Some sentences can be structured differently. Does this sound familiar? Perhaps you are a native speaker of English and know that the same thing happens with English spoken in the UK and English spoken in the US, or with other languages spoken in multiple continents. But with other languages, it's not so common hearing people proclaiming their desire to learn American English, Mexican Spanish, Quebecois French, Swiss German, or Egyptian Arabic. And the national variants of some of these languages are much less mutually intelligible than Portuguese in Brazil and Portugal. Now you might call me a hypocrite. Doesn't it say right there on the cover image of this channel that it will try to teach European Portuguese? Yes, it does, because I know how things are. I know that many people would start a video, realize that it's about Portuguese from Portugal, and turn it off because that wasn't the right kind of Portuguese they need for their vacation in Copacabana. And I also know many people will end up here because they are searching specifically for learning material in European Portuguese. It's not even right to call it European Portuguese. The variant of Portuguese spoken in Portugal is also used in African countries with Portuguese as their official language, and in some other territories across the world. I could call it Standard Portuguese, but that would be unfair to Brazilians because if one is the standard, the other would become a deviation from the norm, and that's not the case. I could call it Euro-African Asian Martian Portuguese, but I won't because the space colony Portugal is installing on Mars is still a big secret and I don't like spoilers. If you ask why this language barrier exists inside the same language, why a person from São Paulo won't understand a person from Évora, I think it's simply a matter of familiarity. All Portuguese people will understand most Brazilian accents because Brazilian music, TV shows, and to a lesser extent movies are common in Portugal and have been for decades. The same thing doesn't happen with Portuguese media in Brazil, and it's entirely Portugal's fault for not trying to sell our culture there. Because of this, whenever an average Brazilian hears an average Portuguese speaking, it's possible that he never heard anyone speaking like that before. As for what flag should identify the Portuguese language in multilingual materials, I have the perfect solution. Leave the flags of both countries alone and use a rectangle with a parrot and a sardine swimming towards each other in the Atlantic. I know the sardine would probably be more at ease in the water, but I swear I'm not being biased. We do have the best Ronaldo though, and we're willing to trade him for the right number of pineapples.